Welcome back, loves. We are now on skill 2, which is identifying quantitative and qualitative evidence. So first off, what is evidence? Well, evidence is another word for data, and the reason why we use data in science class is to back up our claims and build valid conclusions from our experiments. So there's two main types we're going to get into today: qualitative data and quantitative data. Qualitative data is really helpful for helping us to understand why or how a phenomenon happens. On the other side, we have quantitative data, which tells us how many, how much, or even how often something occurs. Starting with qualitative data is described as descriptive data that can be observed but not measured. For example, think of any observation you can make with your 5 senses, such as your sight, your smell, your sense of hearing, your taste, and even your touch. So we can see here that this little baby is having a strong reaction, and because we can't talk to him, we can't get him to rate it from a scale of 1 to 10. So instead, we can take a qualitative observation that he's making a very silly face, and that maybe the drink is sour. Those are both qualitative pieces of evidence to describe what we think is happening here. Another example comes from the movie Despicable Me. That line, "It's so fluffy," is something that's going to stay in all of our heads. Now, fluffy is a very descriptive term that we can all kind of imagine what that feels like, but we can't measure it. So how do we identify qualitative data within our data set? Well, we're going to be looking for, again, those descriptive language. Those are language terms that evoke memories you have. Maybe you can picture it in your head or feel it in your fingertips. They're also going to be data points that don't have any numbers. If you're seeing numbers, it's probably not qualitative. So how do we generate our own qualitative data? Well, there's a number of methods. One, we can have interviews with people. Often when we're sharing our stories, it's not going to come in a numerical format. We can also have focus group discussions. We can use qualitative surveys where people are answering open-ended questions. We can do case studies to take a deep dive into a specific person or phenomenon. And again, we can use our observations coming from our 5 senses. So let's move on to quantitative data. Now, quantitative data is defined as data that can be measured or counted and expressed numerically. So this is where the numbers are. This is probably the data that you most associate with science or math class. For example, in this GIF, we can see Count Von Count holding one number. That number of 1 or even 8 is a sign that we're looking at quantitative data. On the other hand, with a genie from Aladdin, we can see that he has way more fingers on one hand than the average human. But in order to back up that claim, I could use quantitative evidence such as, in this clip, he has 10 fingers on one hand. So how do we generate quantitative data, or how do we identify it? Let's start with identifying. Easiest example is if you see numbers. Numbers are the number one signal that we're dealing with quantitative data. Quantitative data is also easily seen in charts or graphs or in statistics. But how do we generate it on our own? Well, most of our experiments in this class will deal with quantitative measurable data, but you can also do it through surveys if you're asking close-ended questions. You can do a generalization of your results when you're analyzing it to share with others. Quantitative data itself, so things that you're calculating or counting. The sample size, making sure that you're looking at an adequate sample of the population. Structured tools like statistical analysis that will help you out. And most often we use prior studies, or we can use quantitative evidence from before. So I hope this helps you out. Thank you for joining me on our discussion of quantitative versus qualitative data.